So I finally completed the newest installment in the main series of Pokemon games, and as much as I want to rant about so many different things, not only about the game but the franchise in general, such as its unwillingness to evolve despite the word being one of the most important in the game's vocabulary, or how the designs of the Pokemon have been on a steady decline, I will do my best to keep this review to the point. I want to also preface this review with the fact that I did in fact like Pokemon Sword overall, so understand that everything I say, no matter how negative it gets, does not mean that I hate the game. So let's start with the wilds. This is probably the best idea Game Freak has had for the main series since its inception. The ability to wander aimlessly and just experience the world is what many longtime fans have been begging for years. This is further enhanced by the camp mechanic, which can be used to fully heal your team out in the field. But despite all of this, there are several things I don't like about it. The first being that the wilds are just too small. This is probably because they were using it as a proof of concept, and in future games we can probably expect to see a much larger open world, so I'm not going to go on about this. The next thing that bugs me is how the camp allows you to restore the PP of moves, because this allows you to remain out in the wilds indefinitely. If you can imagine a Pokemon game with a wilds the size of Hyrule's Breath of the Wild, where you can heal your team as effectively as any Pokemon Center, why would you ever go back to town? You need to create a system with some sort of limited resource, or all challenge fades away. That's why Nuzlockes exist. They turn your Pokemon into a limited resource that adds challenge to a game that is otherwise unlosable. So bottom line, make the wilds much larger, camp good, healing PP bad. Now let's talk Dyna Maxie. Game Freak has been adding stupid fucking gimmicks to their Pokemon games since at least Ruby and Sapphire, which introduced Contest, and some might argue that the gimmicks began in Silver and Gold when they introduced shiny Pokemon. But this game's useless feature designed to build hype for the game is the ability to make your Pokemon grow to the size of Godzilla, and then use some of the most least creative attacks to piddle on your opponent's King Kong-sized monster. This could have been a cool mechanic if there was any strategic or tactical use for it, but you can only do it within a limited number of battles throughout the story, and because the power level of these McDonald's supersized meal Pokemon generally outweighs the non-Super Saiyan Pokemon, it just boils down to using your spinach at the same time the opponent does, so that the match will remain fair. There are World of Warcraft style boss battles they call raids that use this gimmick as well, but only one of the four players can equip the Sword of Grayskull to their Pokemon, so the other three are a little more than ants trying to avoid a magnifying glass. Even the goddamn Z-moves from Sun and Moon had more tactical use than this atrocious gimmick, and the Z-moves were an absolutely terrible idea too. I think the last thing I really want to talk about in depth is the story. Pokemon has always had a bit of a problem with telling its story. Like with every Pokemon game, the primary tale is your journey through the region to become champion. Meanwhile, on that adventure, a villainous group straight out of the worst comic books tries to take over the world. The big problem being that oftentimes confronting Team Insert Blatant Name Here comes off as interrupting your adventure, made worse in several games by needing to prove your worth before doing so. It creates a jarring disconnect that waterboards my immersion. This game does a better job than most previous titles by making Team Dipshit a small part of the narrative that only really acts as the Pokemon game's usual roadblocks. Annoying, but better than running into an invisible wall, I guess. Meanwhile, the real antagonistic force, although fucking obvious from the start, stays in the background for most of the game, doing what it can to not disrupt the player during their collection of the badges. However, any praise I would like to give it for this restraint is taken back almost immediately, because instead of waiting until after the championship match, the story decides to interject itself between the Elite Four, so to speak, and the champion, giving the player the biggest set of blue balls since Thanos after Lady Death told him she wasn't interested in him anymore. So yeah, fuck the story. The only other thing I have to say about the game are the same complaints everyone and their grandmothers have had about the Pokemon games since they were released in and after 2002. It's too linear, version exclusive Pokemon, trade evolutions, etc. Go ahead and defend these and other complaints all you want, but it doesn't change the fact that these problems shouldn't exist in the first place, especially not today. No other game that withholds content from you unless you have a friend with a different copy has ever been defended as much as Pokemon has. And it only has these defenders because too many of the people who grew up with it would sacrifice their firstborn child in defense of this franchise. It honestly baffles me how Game Freak has made such a great game in Red and Green/Blue, followed it up with a strong sequel in Gold and Silver, and then couldn't seem to figure out what about those two games made it work. So they started dropping acid while watching old anime because everything after those two has just been a thinly veiled attempt to ape those shows. Once again, don't get the wrong idea. Pokemon Sword and Shield are good enough games, I suppose. I did enjoy them overall, but they're married to the same problem Pokemon has had for 25 years now. The Wilds were a great innovation, but it shouldn't stop there. How about updating the battle system to be a bit more flowing, or using compression methods from after the Nixon administration? At least then I could stop bitching about Pokemon making the same mistakes from 1996. Instead, I'll be able to make new complaints about them making 20-team mistakes, like adding loot boxes and DLC Pokemon.